Today, two U.S. House committees voting to move forward with an aviation safety bill known as the Alert Act. The bill aims to address recommendations made by the National Transportation Safety Board after the crash of Flight 5342. Dylan Domingue has been following this. He joins us from the newsroom with what the next steps are. And Dylan, some lawmakers are still saying the revised bill needs work.
Yeah, Brock, so if the Alert Act does pass and become law, it would be the first significant piece of aviation safety reform signed into law following that deadly crash. NTSB Chairwoman Jennifer Hamady says the changes made to the bill now addresses the recommendations made after the collision. This includes the use of ADS-B flight tracking technology on aircraft. The Alert Act would also require equipping planes and helicopters with the proper collision avoidance systems. Today, Kansas Representative Sharice Davids spoke about the bill as it passed through committee.
The ADS-B issue is something that is included in the Alert Act, and it was the primary focus of the Rotor Act. So some of those provisions, through conversations with the NTSB, through conversations with the families, have been also included in the Alert Act as well.
The Alert Act would also permanently close helicopter Route 4 near Reagan Airport. That's the same route the Army helicopter was on that night when it passed directly in the path of the landing plane. Now, new tonight, the Senate Transportation Committee is responding, saying while the Alert Act is ambitious in its goals, it still falls short of a strong and clear requirement for common sense technology. Lawmakers now will have to work through those differences for any aviation safety legislation to pass. Brock?